Hey guys, and welcome to another Hobby Tips. So today we're going to be learning about painting a nice smooth bone color on cloth for a Stormcast Eternal, but you could really use this technique on any kind of, well, not just cloth but armor as well, but just essentially trying to build up some nice smooth layers of a cream bone color and get a good finish on it using layering and highlighting. Very simple techniques, very much like the techniques that we've been using in my previous videos for hobby tips and how to paint videos, using a lot of that knowledge that's already there and then applying it now to a cream color. And white colors and cream colors can be quite hard. They often can be a little bit chalky on their finish, and so learning to do this slowly in layers and build up a nice simple stepped process can help you to learn control the paint and give you a much more satisfying result. So if we have a look at the one I've got here, so we can see that it's come up nice and smooth. You've got a bit of shading there, there's a bit of highlight, but there's not that many layers of color here. It's quite simple, and this goes really well for this particular color scheme because a lot of the other areas done a lot faster, which is the metal and so on, and so that leaves you some time and space to actually hone in on an area like this and make it a little bit nicer, a little bit higher detail to give the overall finish of the model like a higher level finish basically, but without it taking a huge amount of time overall. So just like with the other techniques for painting the black and skin and so on that I've done previously, this is the same concept basically. So we've got another model here that we're going to use. Put that off to the side, and we're going to do the front little piece here, and there's a bit on the back, and we're going to go through and build up those layers. So it'll only be maybe 3 or 4 different levels of color, but it's going to help you learn to control the paint, water down your paints and so on, and yeah, just end up with a really cool result that you can apply to a whole army, and it's not going to take a huge amount of time. Alright, so I'll get started, set up the palette and so on, and we'll begin. So the colors we're using today are this Vallejo color here, model color. It's US Field Drab. Now if you've seen it in my other videos, you know I really like this color. So this basically simulates, it's a bit of a desaturated brown, mid-tone brown, that really resembles a very old color that's really awesome, which was called Graveyard Earth, which is a very old Citadel color, and you can't get that anymore. And this is about as close as I've found to getting that color. I'm sure there might be another company out there that still makes something that's similar, but I haven't found it. So this is a really great base for doing cream colors, especially bone and stuff like that. It's a very, very good color. So I like to go on first with this to give us a nice base to build up those lighter tones. You never want to put a light color over black. It just doesn't work. I mean, it sounds obvious, but when you're first starting, you may not realize just how much that affects the color. So you want a nice good solid base, and Vallejo's colors generally a good coverage, so this works really well. And then to build the actual bone colors, we're going to be using some Ushabti bone from Citadel, and that'll give us, it's not quite as bright as I think the Screaming Skull one or the other one that they've got, and this is a nice mid-tone cream color, and it works really well for this because we're going to use white to get the lighter tones. So that's just the white here on the end, and that'll give us our highlights. So nice and simple, nothing too complicated there. We've got it all set up, so you've got it in a line. Okay, we're going to do our normal thing when we build our gradients and build it up, but the first step, we need to base paint, base color the areas that we want the bones. So we get our brush out, get a little bit of water onto the brush, mix it across, drag it across to where you're going to build your gradient. Okay, add a few drops of water in. So the recipe here is, I guess, maybe 2 or 3 drops of water to a dollop of paint. But it varies from paint to paint. So I like a nice thin coat, so this might mean you do like maybe 2 layers to get a nice even finish, but you're just going to get a much better result at the end, and so doing that is just going to help. And as I said, because we've chosen some faster techniques on the other areas, that's going to allow us to slow down here and do a better job on this spot, and so overall you get a higher finish. So now we're ready to go. Just some paint on the end of your brush so you can see the point. Get your model on the other hand, and now we begin. So all we're trying to do is just lay that layer down. We don't have to, this particular layer doesn't have to be super even. It can be just one coat, and the main reason for that is that we're going to be doing, you know, a few layers above this, and so it should work. If you do get some really dark black areas, then obviously you might want to just touch those up, but you probably won't need a full 2-layer coat for this one, just because of the nature of the way we're going to be applying the paint and how it's going to be built up. So it should work out pretty well. Alright, so once we've established that base layer, now I ended up doing 2 layers on this just to make it a little more even, and we're looking, it doesn't have to be totally perfect. As you can see, there's still a little tiny bit of that black showing through, and that's totally fine. It doesn't have to be ultra smooth, like ultra you know, solid for this particular level. It's the next stages where we want to concentrate on that and build that nice smooth finish. So now we're going to start to mix in our Ushabti here and create our first base layer, which is going to be, I guess, the shadow for this this cloth. So what we want is just a shade that's just a little darker than the Ushabti, something just like a step down basically. So we just keep adding a little bit of this brown in to create that little step down below the Ushabti. So it doesn't have to be super dark here. As you can see, it's just a little bit of an off cream color, a bit more brown in it, and we're going to use that as our base to build up. A few dollops of water in there, twirl the brush, make sure it goes off nice and smooth and soft. So you don't want any kind of resistance here. We don't want a texture build up because we're doing quite a few layers, so we want to have a nice smooth thin layer to go down. And now we're just going to start building that in, and the trick with trying to get this nice and smooth is not to work the paint too much. Just put that layer down very smoothly, nice even strokes. You know, just slow down your process a bit. Don't be too worried about how fast you're going initially, because these layers are the most important basically. The better you put these layers down, the more the finish is going to have that smooth result, and you won't get that chalkiness. Just watching the consistency of your paint. Okay, and you're effectively going to be basing the whole thing. You may leave a small amount of this dark brown maybe on the edges where it connects to another material. That's fine. If you were doing armor, you might leave this dark brown in the recesses, in the cracks and grooves of that armor. But because we're doing cloth, we're going to basically do the whole thing in this new layer. This is really the base layer for the bone. We're not wanting to go quite as dark as this. Now, if you're doing parchment paper or, you know, purity seals, that type of work, then you might actually go a little darker and have more of this base layer, this dark brown showing through to sort of show the discoloration of the paper and so on. But for this, we want a nice, you know, bright, bony cloth to represent, I guess, the purity of these Sigmarite warriors. You know, we're trying to get a little bit of that look for them. You know, they're meant to be the shining example for the Empire people, the Sigmarite people in the world, and we want to make them look as bright and beautiful as possible, but still, you know, still have a little bit of grunginess in there, but not too much. So we just go through and do all that, and we're probably going to do, again, you'll probably do a second layer to even it out, and once you've got that down, we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so now we've got that next layer down, and I've done about 2.5 layers pretty much for this one. So two coats and then a sort of little extra one just on some of the areas where there's still a little tiny bit of black showing through in the main sections of the cloth. So we want to make sure this is a nice, even, smooth layer. As you can see, you know, very little blemishes or discolorations. We want a really nice, soft, smooth look. And so that just means, you know, those couple of thin layers. And now you might be thinking to yourself, wow, you know, it's already like 4 and a bit, almost 5 layers of paint down just to do this bone. But that's actually what it takes to do light colors, especially when you're doing it over black. You really do need to slow down your painting process and have that nice, thin layers, you know, built up slowly, and you'll see a massive difference and improvement on those colors on your models, and it just ends up making the whole thing look a lot better. So, you know, like I said before, one of the tricks to these types of things, if you're going to include a color like this, is you have other areas of the model that are easier and faster to do, so that you do have that time to slow down here, because really what you're trying to do is really get a good sense of the paint and the flow of the paint on your brush, so that you're getting that one-to-one, between your control and the flow and the model. And it sounds a bit sort of zen-like or whatever, but that's really what you're trying to get to, is you're trying to really feel the nature of the paint and how it comes across onto the model, and that will improve your understanding of how the paint works, and you'll get better and better results, because it's not just a practical application of, yes, I add this and then I do this and you get equals that result. A lot of it has to do with intuition and your instincts, your creative instincts, and building up that close relationship between you and the paint and the brush and the model, and just building all that together. And part of that is slowing down and allowing yourself to actually just stay in the moment and do that. So I would suggest putting some music on or something like that, and just really pay attention to what's going on. And when you're painting, actually watch the brush and see the way it flows across the surface and how that paint is reacting to those marks. And if it's not reacting properly, adjust your the way you're actually like dragging that paint out with your hand. So you'll adjust it. Maybe it's the angle you're on is too low, so you come up a little bit, or maybe the angle of the model is in the wrong shape, the wrong way, so you can't get a good drag. But you're always trying to move around and create the perfect position for your painting, and that will improve everything. So now we're going to move on to the next shade. So this one is basically going to be just a little bit darker than the Ushabti, so we're not quite at Ushabti yet, so we're just going to add a little bit of that tint in, so it's just going to be slightly darker. So you just mix it into your gradient that you've got here, and we'll have just a slightly off version of our Ushabti that's just got a little bit of that brown in there, not too much, just a little tiny bit. And we'll just add a little bit of that water in, 2 or 3 drops, get a nice smooth consistency, twirl off the end of the brush to get your nice point back. And now we're going to be considering where our light is. So with cloth, you're looking at all of the raised areas. So we're just going to be coming in here, test it out on a spot where it's, an easy one to try on this big fold here. And that's looking pretty good. So we're just going to be doing most of the raised areas, and even some of these very shallow depths here. We'll actually go over it with this off color, because when we do the Ushabti and the highlights, there will still be shadow there, so you're not trying to leave every single area, just the main creases with this particular coat. So we come down here and we'll run along the edge, okay, and this is where you're going to start to do these little kind of like dragging motions, where we're starting to add in a little bit of, I guess, soft texture into the way the colors are built up. So I often do this especially over like cloth and that sort of thing, where you're going to have, where fabrics have a weave, so you want to add a little bit of that kind of sensation, but it's still going to be smooth. So it'll allow it also to very gradually blend into the colors underneath. So we're trying to create that nice soft transition. So on this sort of area, we'll come down to the edge here and make sure we've got some highlight on that edge. So we just build that across. Okay, and for this sort of really deep area here, we're probably going to do most of it in this color, just because it's going to be slightly too stark a contrast with how light we're going for the next layers. So I would just feather that in like that, and so you get a little touch of that deep color down the base of that spot. But you're not going to have that much of it. It's going to be mostly lighter tones, because you will see the difference when we start to put the Ushabti on and so on. So you just gently feather that in, just moving it, and just keep going around. When we come up to here to these top areas, we're going to run the brush down and across the top of the folds, okay, like that, nice, smooth, soft motions. Okay, we're just going to be hitting those raised areas like that, and you're going to allow a small amount of that shadow to sit inside the fold and the creases, and leave the lighter color. And so we're going to go around and do all that now across it, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so let's take a look. So even with this layer, I've gone back, and as you're painting, you'll probably do a second layer over some areas. So we're even doing two layers for this one as well. And so what you're trying to do is, hit those nice raised areas and allow that shadow to bleed in, and some really soft areas, like I said down here, we're sort of going over the top of it, knowing that we're going to put highlights for those areas later to give some definition. We're doing a very soft and subtle transition here. If you have a look at real cloth, light colors, you're not going to see a lot of shadows unless it's being hit by very hard light. You're not going to notice a lot of deep shadows. I suppose if it is very crunched up and you've got very deep folds, you'll get some shadow, but if it's got very subtle folds, you're not going to see a lot. So we're trying to simulate that. So now we're going to do straight or sharpie. Okay, and put it next to our gradient there, like that. Add our water in, get that nice smooth consistency, and now we're basically going over the same thing, leaving the shadows and just hitting the raised areas. Okay, so we'll start on this nice big area here, nice smooth drags of the brush, hitting those raised areas, getting that nice clean look, feathering it in where you need to feather it, just softening that in, letting those areas dry, coming back to them, touching them up if you need to, adding a little bit more of the color. Okay, and you're going to start to see it will dry a lot less bright than what you're seeing when it's wet. So we're just coming along, hitting all the edges, nice slow methodical drags, building up that color. Okay, and then we come back, we'll take a look at it and start to do the highlights. And now we're going to move on to our highlight. So you can see now we've basically got our bone color down, we've got our shading. Now on this footage it's going a little bit yellow, but in reality it's got a much softer, slightly more pale look to it. You'll see that at the end in the overview and the photo, and obviously in the thumbnail of this video you'll see that it's a bit more of a whitish cream color. So yeah, there's no, if you really look at it, there's no like heavy marks in it. We've got a little bit of feathering that we've done, but that's intentional. Okay, but we look at the top here, nice and smooth, there's very little blemishes in it, and yes, it's taken quite a few coats, but this is really what it takes to actually build up a color like this. And so now we're going to move on to our highlights. So you want to grab your brush, make sure it's got a fine point, add a little bit of the white in, and we're going to build up a tone that's a little bit, I guess, lighter than the Ashabti, but not too light. So something in around there, and then we might even do like a final highlight layer after that. So we just build up this color. You can use what's there. We're just looking for a slightly brighter tone. So something in around this I think is about right. We can test it out. So we'll come up here and we're just looking at hitting now the raised areas. So we'll just see how light that goes on. Yeah, that's looking all right. So for this highlight layer it can be a little bit thicker in consistency because obviously you don't want it running or spreading too much, because we're trying to do some nice fine highlights. And so we're just now hitting all of the raised areas. You can see the way I'm holding this this model and the brush and everything. It's much closer. I'm trying to just use the tip of the brush and let that paint just draw off the end without me putting almost any pressure at all. I'm just dragging it down, letting that go. Not a lot of like pressure at all, just letting it run off there, and we're getting those nice highlights. And so I'm going to go through and do that now over the areas, and then we'll take a look at it and probably do one final highlight. Alright, let's take a look. So there we go. So now we're starting to get that light coming through. Again, it's a little washed out here, but you'll instantly notice it when you do it on your model. You're starting to get that pale color coming through, and it's going to be jumping out at you. And if you've got like a nice dark black like this surrounding it, it's going to really contrast well. So now we're going to do just one final highlight just on some of the very raised areas across the top, just to further pick this out and give it a bit more of a sense of brightness, and just on those edges. So we just mix in a little bit more of this white and create this sort of very bright kind of light bone color. Okay, get your point back, and now we're just going to hit those very raised areas. So we're just coming in with the edge of the brush and just very lightly hitting just the centers. Okay, just coming in and hitting those very soft little lights. Okay, just with a nice fine brush, mostly towards the center. Okay, and then you'll get that nice highlight. So I'm going to go through and just do a little bit of central work there, and just on these edges and across just the very tips, right? So just feathering in a little bit of that light just on the edge, you know, around it, just to break it up and give that little extra pop of light going on. And there we have it, the final result. So you can see you just get that extra bit of light. It's worth doing that extra highlight just to make it pop. As I said, this camera footage is going to blow it out a little bit, but you'll see instantly how this looks when you do it yourself. The lighter, whiter cream color will just help give a lot of life to this and make it pop. So at the end you'll see the overview, better photo of it, and the list of paints that I've used here, and so I hope that helps. You know, but it should really give you a good result, and you'll get to understand how the paint works and how to build up those colors more effectively for your own painting. So yeah, enjoy using this technique. I know it is a bit of a slow one, but it does have a reward at the end. And if you have enjoyed this, please hit that like button, subscribe button. It really helps me out. And I guess I'll catch you on the next one.